While I was preparing dinner to meet my boyfriend's parents, I went out to the garage to grab 2 more chairs and heard his sister say, "Oh, I still can't believe you're dating someone like Claire. They were right, you should break up with her before things get any worse." Ryan laughed, his voice as light as if he were talking about a return. "I'm working on it. The lawyer says if you play it right, you can even get a cut of her company." I stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. I heard the two of them laugh. Then Ryan's voice came back, "Vanessa is the one. Claire is just a stopgap." I stepped back, my hands still clutching the folding chair, my heart racing, but my face strangely calm. I went back inside, set the table, poured the wine, and continued to entertain his parents as if nothing had happened. That night, I laughed. I cut the roast for them. I nodded at his sister's empty stories. But inside me, a world had collapsed. 3 years. I had loved that man for 3 years, since he didn't even have a stable job. Since he was just a software engineer who quit his job to pursue his dream of starting an education startup with nothing but a demo with a broken font and a rickety laptop. At that time, my friends asked, "Claire, what are you thinking? Someone like you choosing someone like that?" I just laughed. Because I saw what others didn't see: potential, perseverance. A light in his eyes when he talked about his dream. I didn't choose Ryan because he was perfect. I chose him because I believed that if someone was there for him at the right time, he would succeed. And I chose to be that person. I let him stay with me when his old lease expired. I paid the rent, took care of most of the living expenses. When he was unemployed, I didn't push him. I cooked, encouraged him, helped him make presentation slides, fixed every line of code, even pretended to be an investor so he could practice before the fundraising. I bought him a new laptop with the savings I intended to use to upgrade my studio. One time he almost missed a deadline. I did all the accounting and handled client emails for him, something I had never done before. But I didn't feel like I was sacrificing anything. Because when I was in a relationship, I thought we were a team. His success was my success. His family never really liked me. His mother was always politely distant. His father would occasionally ask me how long I was going to keep doing that painting thing. His sister would look at me like someone waiting for someone else to make a mistake. But Ryan was always there for me. "Ignore them," he would say. "I love you. We live for each other, not for them." I believed him. It's enough to keep investing in the relationship time, money, and faith. I thought if I stuck with it, things would work out. I would get their recognition. There would be a dinner party, where we would all sit down to eat, and I would belong. I looked forward to that night. I had picked out his dad's favorite dish, ordered the cake he'd requested last year, and mixed the wine to his mom's exact temperature. I wanted them to see I cared, I was kind, I was worthy. But the moment he heard Ryan and his sister's voices outside the garage, everything fell apart. Love, 3 years of trust, sleepless nights, promises whispered in exhaustion. It was all laid bare in a few casual words, as if I had never been an important person in his life. I carried the chairs into the house, set them down at the dining table, and kept my welcoming smile on as if nothing had happened. My hands didn't shake, my eyes didn't redden, and my voice didn't falter. I cut Ryan's favorite steak for his dad, poured his mom some more wine, and asked his sister about her new job, all as perfect as if I hadn't been standing frozen outside the garage a few minutes earlier. Listening to the man I'd loved for 3 years talk to his sister about how to get out of the relationship and take a piece of the company I'd worked so hard to build. They said it like I was a temporary investment, a reasonable stepping stone to something more worthy. And, worst of all, Ryan didn't hesitate. There was no guilt in his voice, no hint that he'd ever seen me as a human being with feelings. It was just a plan in motion, smooth and seemingly long planned. Throughout dinner, I watched Ryan as if trying to remember the version of him I had believed in. The way he took the last bite of salad from his plate, still called me honey in front of his parents, still smiled when I glanced at him, still acted like he was a devoted man who loved me with all his heart. I began to wonder how much of the past few months had been real. How much of the loving words were meaningful? Or had it all been a rehearsal for a planned retreat? When his sister told me about home, I saw her glance at me with satisfaction, as if I had fallen right into their trap. As for his mother, she didn't say much that night, just nodded and smiled. But there was something in her eyes, not friendliness, but a subtle mockery. His father was busy talking business with Ryan, asking about funding rounds, markets, interest rates, things I had thought were the fruits of my labor. I understood now they never considered me part of that dream. As everyone started eating dessert, I sat quietly sipping my wine. The sweetness of the cake mixed with the bitterness of the black currants in my throat, but I couldn't feel anything anymore. All I could feel was Ryan's words echoing in my head, as clear as if someone were playing the tape over a loudspeaker. "You're just a transition." I looked at the man beside me, the man I once thought would be my future husband, and suddenly felt strange. He was still sitting there, still handsome, still talking charmingly, but that gaze, that voice, was no longer the one I loved. Or maybe it had never belonged to me. That night, when the guests had all gone home, I said I would wash the dishes so he could go upstairs first. Ryan hugged me from behind, planted a kiss on my cheek and whispered, "Thank you, today was perfect." I responded with a faint smile. After he went upstairs, I stood in the kitchen, looking at the sink with white foam, and felt like I was standing between two worlds. One was what I once believed, the other was the truth that had just slapped me in the face. I couldn't sleep. I lay there all night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock ticking. Ryan slept beside me, breathing evenly, carefree, as if he had never known sin in his life. I turned my face toward the window, trying to piece together all the pieces I had missed, the times he went on unexpected business trips, the hastily deleted messages, the way he avoided me when I asked about his investment accounts, the way he had recently said, "Wait a little longer, things are about to change," whenever I mentioned buying a house together. Maybe I knew. Maybe a part of me had always sensed something was wrong. But I tried to believe because I didn't want to lose faith in something I had devoted my entire youth to nurturing. Ryan didn't just betray my love, he betrayed my trust, my sacrifice, and the years I would never get back. And the most painful thing wasn't that he was plotting to leave me, but he planned to take away the most precious thing I had built: my job, my passion, and my self-respect. He didn't just want to leave. He wanted me to be left with nothing. I said nothing that night. No screaming, no questioning, no anger. I just lay there, my back to Ryan, listening to his steady breathing, letting the anger cool to a thin layer of ice on my chest. The next morning, I made coffee for us like I always did. I asked him if he wanted his eggs soft-boiled or sunny side up, and I wished him a good day at work before he headed out the door. But beneath the placid surface, I had already begun to plot. Not for revenge. I simply needed to know the whole truth, how much of what I was living was real and how much was a well-orchestrated act. I started with his laptop. Ryan was a man of simple passwords that changed slightly over the years, and this year I knew he was using a new product name combined with his mother's birthday. The second time I tried, I got in. The work folder was right there on the desktop. But it wasn't the blueprints or project plans I was looking for. I looked in my email first, typing in the keyword Vanessa. The inbox was filled with messages between him and her, with enough content for me to understand that their affair was not a one-time mistake, as I had vaguely heard from his friends. They talked like a real couple, planned a trip to New York for the holidays, even discussed renting an apartment together if everything went as planned, and in one starred email, Vanessa asked, "Does she have any suspicions?" Ryan replied, "No, Claire still thinks you're the one." I kept digging. In the drafts section, I found a detailed financial plan down to the numbers: division of assets, cash flow from my company, joint investments, even the transaction history of the secondary card I'd given him last year. There was a spreadsheet that read Phase 1, image stabilization, Phase 2, ramping up fundraising, Phase 3, transition. I felt like throwing up. Each dry sentence was a blueprint for betrayal. There was also a draft letter to a lawyer discussing protecting your rights in case of a breakdown of the relationship. In it, Ryan described himself as having contributed significantly to Claire's company's development, a way to justify asking for a share of the profits if they split. I printed it all out, I put it in a file, and tucked it away in my desk drawer in the studio. During the day, I acted like I was normal. I don't know how I could do it. Still hugging him after work, still having dinner together, still lying next to him in the same bed. But maybe I needed more time. I needed to be sure I knew everything. Part of me still didn't want to believe it. I kept hoping to find some evidence that would contradict what I'd just seen, a random text, a half-hearted confession, a sign that Ryan still loved me, even if only a little. But there was none, just increasingly clear, cold, and brazen evidence. I checked our joint bank account, where we were saving for a house. I found that Ryan had been withdrawing small amounts every month, always below the minimum, so as not to trigger an alert. In total, more than $18,000 was gone. The last withdrawal had been last week, 2 days before the dinner. The reason listed on the statement was personal investment. I remembered that evening when he took me out to dinner, complimented me on my choice of dress, and said, "I can't wait to introduce you to my parents." I laughed back. Now that I think about it, I think I must have laughed like a fool. I hired a temporary phone tracking service. Within days, I had a log of the times and locations of Ryan's calls. Vanessa wasn't just an ex. She was close. They'd met at least 3 times in the past 2 weeks. At an hourly apartment in the north end of town, the schedules matched Ryan's claims of meeting potential partners. The story was no longer a blank. All the initial suspicions had become certain. Ryan hadn't just cheated on me, he'd planned to take everything I had, drain me, and disappear, taking Vanessa with him, taking the assets I'd spent 3 years building and leaving me with a deep hole in my gut. I sat back at my desk, looking at the unfinished blueprints, the unsigned contracts, and felt like a sleepwalker who'd woken up in the middle of the night. I had fallen asleep in a false dream, and the person who lay beside me every night turned out to be the one setting the alarm. Now I was awake, and I would not be silent again. It took me 3 nights to gather everything. Part of me wanted to scream, throw it all at him, make him admit it, make him feel ashamed, make him get on his knees and apologize. But then I realized, if he could sleep soundly next to me all that time, while secretly betraying me and plotting every step to destroy me, then what I needed wasn't a confession. I needed the truth to be laid bare in front of all the people who believed I was not good enough for Ryan. I needed to let him know, let his family know, that I wasn't as stupid as they thought. So I made a plan, step by step, detail by detail, like I was designing a blueprint whose internals only I understood. I started by backing up everything from his laptop to my own hard drive. Every email, every spreadsheet, every text message with Vanessa. I put it all together in a folder called Truth, divided into 3 parts: personal lies, financial lies, and a purposeful breakup plan. I kept a record of withdrawals from our joint account, comparing dates and reasons. I even contacted the bank to verify a deposit in both of our names, but it had long been clear that only one person was manipulating it. I also took a photo of my company's balance sheet, which showed that all the value had been built before Ryan came into my life. He had never contributed a dime, signed a contract, worked a day for me. All of it was clearly documented. And I knew that if he brought a lawyer, I would be more ready than anyone could ever imagine. I installed a small recording device in the living room, near where he usually sat for phone calls. That evening, he called Vanessa again. His voice was low, but still clear enough for me to record him saying, "It'll be done in a few weeks. She doesn't suspect a thing." I put the recording at the top of the folder as a preamble to the rest of my story, and then I started planning dinner. I told Ryan that there was a serious problem with the company. A major client was pulling out of a contract, and I needed advice from his father, whom he had always considered his financial advisor. I sounded panicked, even letting my eyes redden as if I had been crying. He hugged me, rubbed my back, told me I was stressed, and let me see if I can help. I nodded and suggested a small dinner at home, with his parents, his sister, and if possible, his cousin he'd mentioned. The more the merrier. Ryan agreed without question. He even thanked me for trusting his family in a difficult time. I just smiled. Little did he know that they were the ones who were about to witness his life falling apart. I prepared the dinner as if it were a special occasion. I picked out his mother's favorite dish, ordered his father's favorite wine, and set the table with the china his family had given me for Christmas last year. I printed out all the evidence, clipped it neatly, and placed it in a black folder. I also had a tablet ready to play the recording if needed. I worked out every little detail, who would sit where, when I would start speaking, and what my first sentence would be. In my head, it all played out like a rough cut for a documentary, fact-fillered, raw, emotionless. And the audience was the ones who thought I was just a lucky girl to have Ryan. That night, when everyone was there, I sat in my usual spot next to Ryan, smiled, raised my glass. I looked at each face in turn, the people who had told him I wasn't worth it, the people who had whispered behind my back that I was holding on to him too tight. I took a deep breath, and then I opened the file. Not to cry, not to hold on, but to let everyone know that the man they saw as their son, their brother, the heir to their hopes, was actually a cowardly traitor wrapped in a suit. I placed the file on the table as if it were just a normal business plan, no one guessing that it was about to expose the entire dark side of the man sitting next to me. Everyone had finished their main course, and the wine glasses were refilled for the second time. The atmosphere around the table was artificially bland, repetitive stories, polite smiles, habitual nods. I glanced at Ryan, who was still chatting happily with his father, occasionally turning to gently squeeze my hand under the table, as if to reassure me about the company problem I had invented. I smiled, nodded, and then gently retrieved the tablet from the seat beside me. "I know you heard me say there was a work issue," I began, my voice light as if I were prefacing a thank you after a meal. "But the truth is, it's not the company that's at issue, it's my relationship with Ryan." The table fell silent. His sister put down her glass more slowly than usual. His mother blinked, silent. As for Ryan, I saw his shoulders tense under his shirt, but he kept his polite smile. "What are you talking about?" he asked quietly, tilting his head at me as if I were joking. I didn't answer. Instead, I pressed play on the first recording. Ryan's voice came through the tablet speakers, along with his sister's, in the middle of our backyard the other day. I had the volume set just right, enough for everyone to hear, but not enough to pretend they hadn't. The atmosphere changed instantly, from relaxed to confused, then cold. Ryan's voice came from the machine. "Just follow the plan, you will get a portion of her company's profits, and then Vanessa is the right person." I paused the recording, opened the file, and began to coldly lay out the evidence, as if I were reading an internal report. The bank statements with Ryan's withdrawals, the printouts of his texts with Vanessa, the emails with his lawyer, and the detailed breakup plan he'd filed under the name Transition Phase. His mother covered her mouth with her hand. His father stood up but said nothing, his eyes bloodshot. His sister lowered her head to the table, not daring to look at me. And Ryan, he stared at me, as if he'd just seen a completely different person, no longer the gentle, patient girlfriend he'd known. I held his gaze. No anger, no pain, just a silence that crushed the self who'd grown accustomed to living on others' trust. "I don't need an explanation," I said, as he opened his mouth to say something. "I just want you and your family to know I'm not the idiot you think I am. I know everything, and I've known long enough to prepare for tonight." I glanced at his mother, then his father. "I thought I needed your approval, but it turns out I just needed to accept that I was wrong to believe in this." Ryan tried to say something, but the words were not strong enough to do anything. He stammered my name, said, "It's not what you think." I laughed, a soft laugh. Not bitter, not spiteful, just the sound of the last lid being closed on a broken machine. "It's not what I think." I turned to the last page of the file, pointing to his text to Vanessa. "Just a little longer, she still doesn't know. Everything's going according to plan." I nodded slightly. I thought it was pretty clear. The atmosphere around the table was no longer one of astonishment, but of devastation. A perfectly prepared dinner, under soft yellow lights, the scent of perfume and roast meat still lingering, but all that was just a facade. No one touched dessert. His father left the table first, quietly walked out, slamming the door so hard that the paintings on the wall shook. His mother followed, her face not angry, just bewildered. His sister walked last, standing still for a few seconds before walking out the door, then softly said, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Ryan sat there alone at the table, now filled with empty glasses and cold papers. He bowed his head, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw him silent and without anything to hold on to. And I stood up, gathered up the files, pulled the car keys from my jacket pocket, and walked out of that house as if I had never belonged there. I drove back to my temporary apartment with the windows half open, the night wind blowing through my hair, but I didn't bother to smooth it. In my mind, I saw Ryan slumped at the table, next to empty glasses of wine and half-turned papers, his mouth silent, his eyes no longer knowing where to look. I didn't turn around, nor did I feel the need to say anything more. What needed to be said, I said. What needed to be exposed, I exposed. What needed to end, I ended. And now I just wanted to be alone. The apartment I rented had only one room, a small kitchen, a few unopened boxes, and a makeshift mattress on the floor. I set the file down on the corner of the table, took off my shoes, sat down on the carpet, and leaned against the wall. No tears, no relief, no joy. There was just a strange emptiness, as if I'd run a long distance and finally stopped and exhaled. I thought I'd feel broken, but the truth was I just felt like I'd left a cage that I'd thought was home. Maybe that was what freedom was. No flash, no fanfare, just silence, cleanliness, and all my own. The next day, I took a few days off from the studio. I told my clients I needed a break to deal with personal matters. No one asked much. Luckily, I'd always kept a clear line between work and personal life, so no one suspected anything. I spent the morning transferring things from the shared account to my own, blocking any remaining access that Ryan might have used. I postponed contracts that were about to be signed. I sent private messages to close contacts to say I'd be away for a few days. Everyone was understanding. I don't need to explain why. I think anyone who's ever been betrayed will understand. By the third day, the messages from Ryan started coming in. At first they were cold, "What the hell are you doing?" lines. Then they became persuasive, then earnest, then desperate. He wrote that it was all salvageable, that he was too stressed, that Vanessa didn't mean anything. There were also messages from unknown numbers, probably Vanessa, telling me to stop if you have any dignity. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to silence them, but because it was so clear to me they weren't sorry for what they'd done, they were sorry for being caught. I only responded to one person, an email from someone named Rachel Wells, with the subject line, "About Ryan." It took me a minute to remember the name. Rachel, Ryan's ex-fiancée, the one he'd said had brutally dumped him before our wedding. In the email, she'd written simply, "I heard about it from a friend. He cheated on me. If you need to talk, I'm here." I read the text over and over, then typed back the same 7 words. "Thank you. I needed to hear it too." We met in a small coffee shop near my new neighborhood. Rachel looked different than I expected. Not cold, not angry, but quietly weary. Like me. She told her story about finding out Ryan was cheating on her with a coworker, about how he blamed it on family pressure, about dreams being stolen, piece by piece. I didn't interrupt. I just sat there nodding, because every word she said was exactly what I had just gone through. There was something about her eyes that made me feel calmer, no longer alone, no longer thinking that I was the only one being stupid. After that meeting, I went home, opened my laptop, and logged into the company accounting system. I completely removed Brian's access to any platform that had ever been related to my work. I changed my studio logo, something I had been thinking about for a long time but had never gotten around to doing. I planned to launch a new product line, something I had been putting off because I wasn't sure if Ryan would agree. Now, I didn't need anyone's permission anymore. My freedom, little by little, was returning. I didn't know what the future held, but I did know this. I had walked out of a false place on my own. I didn't just leave Ryan. I left the old version of myself, the one who believed that loving someone meant sacrificing everything. Now I know love also requires sobriety, and letting go at the right time sometimes is the most complete way to love yourself. I don't know exactly which moment is when I really start over. Maybe it was that Monday morning when I repainted the walls of my studio, switching from a cool gray to a soothing olive green, a color I'd always loved but that Ryan had once dismissed as too bland. Or maybe it was when I put away my old designs, opened a blank file, and started over, not because I needed a new project, but because I needed to remind myself that I was still capable of creating something beautiful, whole, and unattached to anyone. Maybe rebirth doesn't start with a grand declaration, but rather with small actions, repeated every day, consistent enough to wash away the old and make room for the new. I changed my email password. I changed my phone number. I blocked Ryan, Vanessa, the friends who had been on their side, and the connections that had made me doubt myself. I cleaned up my social media, deleted all my old photos, not to wash my hands of them, but to remind myself that I was no longer living in a story that had ended. I started writing again, something I had been doing since college, short, fragmented paragraphs, sometimes describing a room, sometimes how it felt to stand in the rain, with no particular purpose, just a way to reconnect with my own thoughts. I bought a new notebook, a plain brown, unadorned one, and every morning I wrote a single line, "I'm still here." Some days that was enough. Rachel and I kept in touch, not often, not deeply, but enough to know I wasn't alone. Occasionally, she'd send me a link to an article about survivors of romance scams or to support groups for women who had been emotionally manipulated. I'd never joined one of those groups, but knowing it existed made me feel better. Recently, she sent me a text. I signed a contract for a new apartment today. Ryan wasn't there, just me. It felt weird. I smiled. I didn't need to reply. I knew that feeling better than anyone. I also found a few old friends, people I'd cut off because Ryan wasn't comfortable with me being close to them. They didn't complain, they just quietly came back, as if the distance had never existed. One night we sat down to eat at a restaurant we'd known since our single days, and the laughter was loud and clear, not to hide anything. I realized I could still have fun. I could still talk for hours without feeling like I had to hide any part of myself to keep the peace. I started taking on projects I'd turned down because they were too risky. A small coffee shop wanted to redesign its space into a creative workspace. A newlywed couple wanted their apartment to be warm and cozy. The strange request that used to make me hesitate now interested me again. I no longer worried about being too ambitious or too difficult. Now I worked on my gut, and I realized that's what brought clients to me, not because I had a boyfriend to back me up, but because I was me. At the end of the month, I made another deposit into my savings. Not much, but it was all my own money. I bought a small potted plant for the window, a vine that thrives in the shade. Ryan had said it was ugly, not striking enough, but I found it resilient, and I thought, maybe I am too. I no longer count the days since I left. I don't need to measure how much I've recovered. There is no finish line in the healing process. Only waking up every morning, seeing the light pouring through the new window in a new room with a different self, and knowing that I no longer need to carry anyone with me to see my life as valuable. I once gave all my trust to someone who was not worthy. I once thought that love was sacrifice, compromise, and keeping it at all costs. But it turns out that the right way to love is to love yourself first. And from the moment I left that house, I was no longer the weak Claire from the old relationship. I am the Claire of today, sober, steady, and free. And this time, I will rebuild everything. But I will start from my own foundation.